I grew up in the Midwest. I went to university in the South. I went to rabbinical school in the Midwest. And a lot of the radio stations are religious radio stations. And I used to love to listen to evangelical Christian stations because, I'm a student of comparative religions and I like to learn what other people believe. I'm a preacher. I like to take some tips. But I didn't agree with what they were saying. I heard a lot on these radio stations about Sodom and Gomorrah. Our society is following into the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. In Hebrew, Sodom and Amorah. The sin. What is the sin? Well, because we're so influenced by our surrounding culture, if I say the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah, something pops in your head. It's okay, you can think it. But what does our tradition say is the actual sin of Sodom and Gomorrah? Because I think, our society often does fall prey to the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah. But it's not about sex. Our parasha, Vayera, reads, "The Eternal One then said, the outcry in Sodom and Gomorrah, how great it is, and their crime, how grave it is. Let me go down and determine whether they are wreaking havoc in equal measure to the shrieking that is coming to me. If not, I will know." The shrieking, the outcry. According to one tradition, the outcry of Sodom was from Abraham's nephew Lot's daughter. Here's the story. You'll understand why God brings up this outcry. They issued a proclamation in Sodom saying, "Everyone who strengthens the hand of the poor and the needy with a loaf of bread shall be burnt by fire." Plotit, the daughter of Lot, was wedded to one of the magnates of Sodom. She saw a certain very poor man in the street of the city, and her soul was grieved on the account. So what did she do? Every day, when she went out to draw water, she put in her pitcher all the kinds of provisions from her house, and she sustained the poor man. The men of Sodom see this poor man, see how he's thriving. They ask, "How does this poor man live?" When they ascertained the facts, they brought her forth to be burnt by fire. She said, "Sovereign of all the worlds, maintain my right and my cause at the hands of the men of Sodom." After her cry ascended before the throne of glory, and her cry ascended before the throne of glory, in that hour the Holy Blessed One said, "Let me go down and determine whether they are wreaking havoc in equal measure to the shrieking that is coming to me. And if the men of Sodom have done according to the cry of that young woman, I will turn her foundation upwards and the surface downwards," her meaning the city. So according to this midrash, this story, the sin of Sodom, social inequity, and not helping it. The prophet Ezekiel said, "This was the iniquity of your sister, people Israel, Sodom. Pride, fullness of bread, and abundance of idleness was in her and her daughters. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and the needy, and they were haughty." Here we have a rich society that has more than it needs, but it won't give any to the people who have nothing. I was at a conference just on Thursday about poverty in Ontario. Ontario, which has 40% of Canada's population and has a higher poverty rate. The poverty rate in all of Canada is 1 in 7 people live in poverty. In Toronto, it's higher, and the Jewish community in Toronto is the same rate as poverty in all of Toronto, which I think is maybe around 15% of people. Poverty, I think, will be an issue in the upcoming Ontario elections. I'm not telling you what party to vote for, but I am telling you to look at the party platforms. What is their stance on poverty? What is their stance on minimum wage, on basic income, on social assistance? The sin of Sodom is that the people had a lot that they would not share. Sodom, according to the Bible, was a very wealthy city. It says in Genesis 13 that it was like a divine garden. It could afford to help everybody, but the people became too arrogant with all of their wealth. We read from the Talmud, the men of Sodom only became haughty on account of the bounty with which the Holy Blessed One had endowed them. They said, "Since gold and silver flows from our land, what need have we of travelers? We do not require any visitors, since they only come to diminish our substance. Come and let us cause the foot of the traveler to be forgotten from our land." Said the Omnipotent One to them, "On account of the bounty with which I endowed you, do you cause the foot of the traveler, the stranger, to be forgotten from amongst you? I shall cause you to be forgotten from the world." The foreign-born. The people of Sodom wouldn't allow anybody else to come to live there. I commend our country's openness to immigrants. I read the other day that Canada wants to bring in 1 million immigrants in the next 3 years. Now again, I'm not telling you who to vote for, but I think all the political parties in Canada, they can argue about numbers, they can look at what kinds of immigrants to bring in, but I think Canada knows as a society that immigrants are beneficial to Canada. Immigrants and refugees. And I'm very proud that many people in our congregation sponsor and support refugees from Syria, and we continue to do so. Our neighbors to the south, my home country, are another story. A land that was built by immigrants right now is having a big debate about it. We as Jews know that we are commanded to act otherwise. It says 36 times in the Bible that we are not to oppress the stranger, for we were strangers in the land of Egypt. It even says to love the stranger. Other Near Eastern literature said the God, the king, people should support the widow and the orphan. But the only ancient Near Eastern literature found that says we should support the widow, the orphan, and the stranger, the immigrant, the one who is not like you, is the Torah. A third sin of Sodom, our tradition tells us, was the sin of silence, as Ben taught us. It is written, the sin of Sodom consisted not only in what its people did, but what they failed to do. Thus, no one raised his voice in protest when the crowd sought to molest Lot's guests. Failure to protest is to participate in the sin of a community. How often do we really protest when unthinkable horrors are happening every day? Most of us don't even know where Myanmar is. The Torah gives us a model in the same parasha of how not to succumb to the sins of Sodom and Amorah. We need only look to Avraham Avinu, our father Abraham. When 3 strangers came to Abraham's tent, he immediately welcomed them and fed them. The Midrash even states that Abraham was still recovering from circumcising himself and was still in pain. He could have been in bed, but instead he was spending his time waiting outside his tent, just in case some travelers were passing through and needed some rest and food. Abraham shows us how not to succumb to the sin of silence. When God tells Abraham God's plans for Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham argued with God that it is not fair to kill the innocent with the guilty. Abraham pleads for the cities and accuses God of being unjust. Abraham had the chutzpah to say, "Far be it from you to do such a thing, killing innocent and wicked alike, so that the innocent and the wicked suffer the same fate. Far be it from you. Must not the judge of all the earth do justly?" The 16th century Rabbi, the Maharal Judah Low of Prague wrote, "While a person may be individually pious, such good will pale in the face of the sin of not protesting against an emerging communal evil. Not only will such piety not avert the impending evil, but such a pious person will be accountable for having been able to prevent it and not doing so." Silence in the face of evils is Sodom and Gomorrah, and our perhaps worst sin. The contemporary Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson writes, "In the midst of the dark ages of his time, the Maharal Judah Low of Prague understood that his obligation as a being in covenant with God was to represent God's light and God's passion, despite the powerful forces mustered in opposition. In the midst of the current dark age, we too need to remember our eternal calling to sanctify God in the midst of the people. By feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, healing the sick, pursuing peace, and identifying with the weak, we move from silence to eloquence. We provide God with hands and a voice. There is no neutrality. Silence is assent." We pray that our society does not fall prey to the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah. Shabbat Shalom.